Agency owners typically don't lack the time that they maybe think they do. They lack the priorities, or they lack the focus on the right things they should be doing or want to be doing. And that is the theme for today's, I suppose, topic, which is we all have a set amount of time depending on circumstances outside of work. We all have a set amount of time that we're willing to work during the week. Fundamentally, there are a couple of steps that an owner can take that I generally work with them on when I first start working with them one-to-one, that will allow us to understand A, where that time is currently going, B, why it feels like they're not spending the time on the things they want to be, or maybe not seeing the progress they expect, and then C, how we're going to set things up for them so that they have the time to work on the right things. Now, first and foremost, what I'd say would be most owners, understandably, I would say, don't really pay too much attention to what they're doing with their time day in, day out. Because you're setting up a business. You're doing so many things at once. It's almost like a burden to start tracking your time, and it's almost a distraction. But fundamentally, at some point, if you're begging the question or asking the question, why am I not seeing results? Why am I not seeing the progress? Why do I feel like I'm constantly stretched? You're going to have to diagnose or audit what you're doing with your time. So as a starting point, what I like to say is there are two places or two things we can do. One, we can look at your calendar, and two, as I mentioned, we can do a bit of a time audit. So your calendar can often tell you a lot about where you're spending your time. It can give you an idea of maybe your approach to scheduling, your approach to time management. It can give you a sense for what you're actually prioritizing. For example, if you tell me that you're prioritizing business growth or business development at the moment, but I look at your calendar and I see a lot of team one-to-ones or a lot of client meetings, I would maybe disagree with what you initially said, because in reality your calendar reflects something else entirely. So it can be awkward, it can feel strange, but I would always encourage an owner to first and foremost review where their time is actually going, not where we think it's going. And that is a really important distinction, because some owners think they're spending time on certain things, when in reality they're actually spending time on very different things. I suppose an important point to make there is this: they might actually know where they're spending their time, but they might not realize how much time they're spending on that thing. And for me personally, a lived experience of that would be saying that, yeah, I know I speak to the team about clients quite a lot, or I know I speak to the team about clients most days. Until you put a number around that, it's hard to realize how much time you're actually spending. And it probably helped me understand in the past why I felt like the days were quite short, because I was actually spending 1 to 2 hours a day talking to the team about clients. That, in some cases, might be helpful or might be required, but day in, day out, that's a lot of time for someone that's occupying a non-client facing role to be spending on clients. And for most owners, it will be the same thing. They'll have a realization through doing a time audit or through doing a calendar review that, yeah, I knew I was talking to clients, or I knew I was doing one-to-ones, or I knew I was looking at HR related stuff quite a bit, but I didn't actually know how much. So that's a bit of a reality check first and foremost. And that will give you a bit of a benchmark for where things are at with you personally in terms of what you're doing with your time as of today and over the last few months. Beyond that, a common thing that I'll come across will be that an owner knows two things, or has two things up here. One, they have an idea or a fairly clear picture for themselves about where they want to be or how they want to grow. And that's great. They also have a pretty good idea of what they need to do to get there. But generally the missing piece is, what do I prioritize, or where do I start? Or if it is a case that they aren't sure why they're doing what they're doing, we have to get that right first. So this is where the goals and objectives piece kind of comes in. And this is probably one of the most, beyond the time audit and understanding where your time is going, this next piece is critical to understanding what an owner could or should be focusing their time on. So goals mid to long term To me, I personally have always struggled with really long-term goals. Really long-term to me means 3-5 years plus. I might have a vision for what I want my life to be like in that period, and I think a lot of people I work with would say the same. They have an idea for what they want their life to look like, but pegging down a goal over that time can be quite tricky. It's also a very long period of time, and I think what I like to do with people that I work with is say, okay, can we make it feel a bit more real, a bit more tangible if we put a goal that is, say, 12 to 18 months from now? And the question is quite simply, what do you want to be able to say to me? If we were to have a coffee 12 months from now, what would you like to say to me? What are the things that have changed? What are the things that are going really well for you personally? Maybe for your role within the agency or for the agency itself. So we set goals, and this is ultimately the why we're doing what we're doing, or why we're prioritizing what we end up prioritizing as an owner of an agency. So if you don't have this, I personally would say it's almost impossible to make priorities or set priorities. If you don't have this, anything could be a priority. I mean, anything is a task you could do. I suppose just do it and see what happens. But that to me is not a strategic approach. That to me is not sustainable. And that is where I think a lot of owners kind of trip themselves up. So let's say you've got a few goals. I mean, to me, it's pretty wise to maybe have 1 or 2 to 4 key things or key targets or key goals. And when you have those set, you can use that as almost a flag or a pole in the distance as a measure for success for yourself. Objectives then are more short term. So quite simply, again, to make it feel more real, to use the same language I used earlier, we want to take those goals you've set yourself as an agency owner and say, right, as a measure of my progress, or as something I know I need to complete to get me on the right track towards those, I'm going to have to achieve this objective generally over the next 30 to 90 days. Maybe some objectives will be slightly longer term. Maybe there will be some objectives you know that are currently blocked by something that you can begin in the future. But we want to set some objectives. So these objectives, again, they relate very closely to making progress towards these goals. So objectives to me are a wise way for an agency owner to measure progress or assess whether they're going in the right direction. So for example, I don't always recommend doing this, but if an agency owner wanted to hit a certain size of agency in terms of revenue in 18 months' time, an objective towards that might be being in a place where they can say a certain percentage of their revenue come from recurring clients by the end of this calendar year or 6 months from today. That would be progress in the right direction based on the goal they have for themselves and their agency. Once you have objectives, and these have to be very tangible things that the owner themselves and their team can quite clearly say, we are on track to this, or we are achieving this, or we have done this, or we have not. If it's a bit more ambiguous and a bit more up in the air, you can get to the point where you want to review these objectives and you're kind of left scratching your head. I don't really know if I've done this or not, or it's kind of done. Okay, not the end of the world, but it's not tremendously helpful. So these goals and objectives lay the foundations then for understanding what it is you're going to be measured on as an agency owner. And once you know what you want to do, it really is a case of asking that question, well, what could I do towards that? And I say could because there are no doubt dozens and dozens of things that an agency owner would like to do. There are dozens of things an agency owner could do, but can you do them all? No. Is it healthy to do them all? No. Is it sustainable? No. The reason you're speaking to me, if you speak to me, might well be down to the fact you're trying to do 10 things every day, and it doesn't work, at least not in the long term. And for most people, it's not the type of business they want to run, or it's not the type of way they want to conduct themselves within the business they own. So the simple question I always like to pose is, well, what could you do? Let's list them out. And there's going to be a lot of things we could do to hit these objectives, a lot of things we could do to hit these goals. But which ones do we want to focus on is the second question. And once we've listed out all the could do's, we begin to prioritise. Prioritising to me is quite simply, and I think it's fascinating whenever I see an agency owner working through this in their own head, they're looking at a list of 30, 20, 40 things that they've said they could do to achieve these goals. They might even have come up with some more objectives along the way, maybe projects that are going to help them achieve those goals. But then I'll say, well, if you only had to pick 3, or if you had to pick 2, and you couldn't do anything else, what would you do? And they kind of freeze, because that is the discomfort, or that is the first thing we've done here that is really quite foreign to an owner, which is taking a step back and saying, I'm not going to do the rest of these things, I'm going to do these 2 things. So as a bit of an acid test, I'm always like, well, okay, let's prioritise by selecting what are the top 3 from this list in your mind, and why. And there are different ways we can, if we're struggling with this, I don't always want this to just be kind of just picking random things. So you might measure it in different ways. I mean, a simple way to look at it might be based on criteria like impact, time to completion, are there other team members required? There are different things we can put in place here that might help you understand what is actually a priority, or what you want to prioritise, or what you're going to start with, or what would be the one big thing that would make the most difference towards your progress in line with these objectives. But if we can set the priorities in line with these objectives, we're simply saying, okay, here's a long list of things we could do and might well do over the next 6 to 12 months, but we're going to start with these 3. In tandem with this, something that is incredibly important, I call it kind of like a bonus here, but in reality it's not really a bonus. I'd see it almost as like a thing that has to happen alongside the prioritisation. It's an owner saying what I'm not going to do and what I'm going to stop. So out of this could-do list, there's going to be a lot of things that an owner initially is saying I'm going to park for now, or that they're going to delegate. And the delegation piece is really interesting. Can the business have priorities that the owner doesn't own that can still happen? Of course. So for example, depending on the agency size, I would always encourage the owner to think, well, just because you're not doing something specifically yourself, it doesn't mean someone else in the team can't be responsible, provided they have the capacity to do things that will help or contribute towards the growth of the business, which is typically what we're talking about up here and here. So if there are things that feel important that the agency could do to grow, there might be someone else in the business that the owner can delegate that to, who can take responsibility for making sure it happens. But probably the most important one that is so hard for a lot of owners to come to terms with is this idea of not doing something. They feel like it's a missed opportunity. They feel like they're slacking. They feel like they're not going all in on their business. But I'd actually argue it's often the opposite. You're going all in on the top 3 things that you've told me are a priority, that are going to have the biggest influence on whether you hit an objective or whether you get on track to hitting a goal. And that is the key thing. The key thing is not doing lots of things. The key thing is not doing as many things as you can and telling the world about how you did a to-do list of 75 things last week. Making progress on the right things is way more rewarding, way more sustainable, and way more beneficial for the agency in the long run. So when it comes back to deciding how to go about doing these priorities, this is where the time audit and the calendar review come in. So we're kind of going full circle here. We've used the initial audit and the calendar review to establish how much time an owner has outside of their day-to-day requirements or non-negotiables as part of the business functioning. In an ideal world, of course, an owner has as much free time as they need or want to work on things like this, but they'll probably have some commitments within the day-to-day. Outside of that, how much time does the owner have to work on these priorities? And we can simply use our calendar then to decide when you're going to work on your priorities and what days it is, or what structure you want to implement. And that's very personal. Some people might do something like deep work or prioritise certain things in the morning instead of the afternoon, whatever it might be. There's lots of different things we can implement there. But by going through this sort of process, you've taken away the guesswork, You've said, I know I need to work on this thing, so I'm going to do it for X hours. You've taken away almost that element of uncertainty going into a new week. Like, am I going to have time to work on these things? Well, if you're using your calendar in the right way and understanding where your time is going and understanding what your priorities are, you probably have a pretty clear idea for yourself what the week ahead looks like. And equally at the end of the week, you can say to yourself, well, I spent X time on these key things. How did it go? Maybe you need to spend less time. Maybe you need to spend more time. Maybe by working through some of the stuff, you realize there are other things in the could list that are now actually a priority. Maybe through delegating some things to the team, you've realized that, wait a minute, this business is making progress way faster and I'm really happy about it. What else can we delegate? Who else can take on the responsibility of helping me hit these goals? So there's a few unlocks that I see happen for owners as they go through the motions with this. But fundamentally, it will always come back to the point of, it's not that you're lacking time. It's that you just don't know where your time is going and you don't know how you should be spending the time you have. And by going through this type of process, I would hope and expect it to help an agency owner figure out what those priorities are and why they're doing them, and ultimately put a plan in place for actually doing them.